This is the Toyota GR Supra A90, and it's a two-seater rear-wheel drive Japanese sports car that has been fitted with a manual gearbox and co-developed with BMW. And in this full detailed review, I'm going to cover everything you need to know about the Supra and tell you whether or not that if you should still buy one. Because production is going to end this year in 2025, and I couldn't think of any other place to take this except for Bathurst, because Toyota has confirmed that the GR Supra will join the Repco Supercars Championship in 2026. So before we start, please like, share, subscribe, and let's get straight into the video. Let's start off with a brief overview about the GR Supra. There are two different versions to pick from. Pricing is on your screen, and regardless of the model you go for, there are two different transmissions to pick from, between an 8-speed ZF automatic or the 6-speed manual gearbox. And if we move on to options specific to this manual GT version, there are 6 different colours to pick from. And finally, in terms of rivals, this is the type of vehicle that you should compare with the BMW Z4, on which the GR Supra is based on. And it's also worth checking out the Nissan Z, which is also a manual rear-wheel drive sports car. And lastly, the heavily revised Ford Mustang, which I have also driven and filmed at Bathurst. Right, moving on to the design. So the external colour of this example is finished off in a dark blue, which in my opinion does suit this car very well. And compared to any other sports car, the GR Supra does attract a lot of attention when it comes to its styling, because the design does look very similar to the original concept car. And in terms of key features, looking at the front, adaptive LED headlights with LED DRLs, and down on the lower section, open air vents for additional cooling. And it's also complemented by this black trim that integrates into a front splitter. And if we now take a look at the side view, the GT version gets a set of 18-inch alloy wheels that are complemented by these red brake calipers and wrapped around in these Michelin Pilot Super Sport tyres. But it is worth pointing out that the GTS gets 19-inch alloy wheels. However, all model grades do come with adaptive suspension, which means the Supra does perform like a European car on the road when it comes to refinement. And speaking of European, the door mirrors look pretty familiar to an F30 BMW 3 Series. And you also get this clamshell bonnet design, which looks fantastic in my opinion. But what doesn't look so good are the fake air vents over on the top here and by the door on that lower section. But you do get additional side skirts finished off in black and a double bubble roof design to allow more space inside the interior. And if we now take a look at the rear design, at the back we've got a set of rear LED combination lights, this integrated rear ducktail spoiler, Toyota badging in the middle with the GR logo on the right hand side, an integrated rear diffuser with additional trim inserts and airflow elements. There are also 2 giant exhaust pipes which do sound pretty incredible, so take a listen. And finally, down on the bottom is the section for your reversing lights. Right, moving on to the interior. So before you climb inside, this comes with a remote key that looks identical to a BMW key. You also get keyless entry on the doors and door handles from a G20 BMW 3 Series. And finally, push button start over by this section here. Now, if we talk about presentation, inside it does feel more like a BMW instead of a car built from the ground up by Toyota. And in my opinion, I think that is a good thing, because over on the top here, the dashboard materials are nice and soft, even towards this section here, on top of the doors and even where you rest your elbow. The middle section is also nicely padded. You also get this carbon fibre trim over in the centre, and the steering wheel is also finished off in leather and feels very good to grip onto. The door handles are from a late model BMW 3 Series, however all of the switchgear looks very familiar to what you'll find on a BMW 3 Series from 10 years ago. And I bet all this sounds pretty familiar if you know your BMWs, or the beeps and bongs. But it is worth pointing out that the bottom sections do feel a bit scratchy, and you've also got some more piano black materials on the doors and over in the centre, which does show a lot of dust and fingerprints. And your elbow is banging against that cup holder, and when you change gear that can be quite annoying with 2 bottles in the centre. And if we now move on to comfort features, there's dual zone climate control with physical dials and buttons. The seats are finished off in leather and they do feel very comfortable to sit in. They can also be heated and electronically operated. There's also electric seat adjustment with an electric lumbar support. They can also be heated and specific to the driver, seat memory function, and finally the steering offers both manual, tilt and reach adjustment, so it is nice and easy to find a comfortable position behind the wheel. And if we now move on to infotainment, it all runs off this 8.8-inch touchscreen. There are also physical buttons which are also touch sensitive, as you can see up the top there, a volume dial and the classic iDrive controller down in the middle section. And there are also buttons on the steering wheel which look to be uplifted from an F30 BMW 3 Series. Now this system is running BMW's iDrive 6, which is a couple of years old now, but it does work very well and it's very easy to navigate through all of the menus. And if I go into the media functions, there's DAB digital radio, AM and FM, Bluetooth, USB and smartphone integration, which includes wireless Apple CarPlay. However, no ability to connect to Android Auto. And there's also a 10-speaker sound system, which does sound okay, but it is worth noting that the GTS gets a much better 12-speaker sound system. There's also inbuilt satellite navigation, which looks pretty crystal clear. And of course, voice control. And when you go into My Vehicle, this is where you are going to configure most of the car settings, like your driver profiles. And you can even look at vehicle status, which shows you a lot of information about your service requirements. You've got your onboard trip computer integrated within that infotainment. And you can also bring up your power and torque figures on the screen. And if we now move on to safety, you get front and rear parking sensors, a reversing camera with active guidelines, and that picture quality does look pretty impressive. There's also autonomous emergency braking, an auto dimming mirror, blind spot monitoring on the 2 door mirrors. You also get a lane keeping assistant with a lane departure warning, speed sign recognition, and finally standard cruise control with a speed limiter. Whereas if you go for the automatic version, you get adaptive cruise control, and if you step up to the GTS version, you get a heads-up display over on the windscreen. And if we now move on to this 8.8-inch screen in the middle, on the left-hand side shows your speed and on the right your trip computer. And you can configure the menus by pressing on this button over here. There's also a rev counter that looks pretty cool. And there are also selectable drive modes between normal and sport. And you can also configure and set the car up on how you want it to perform. And you can also turn this function on, which will automatically rev match the gear changes. And finally, storage. So the door bins aren't really that big or impressive, but you do get a decent sized glove box that fits the owner's manual in quite well. You also get wireless phone charging with a USB-A and a 12-volt socket. And like I said before, 2 cup holders that can fit 2 small bottles of water. You've also got a bit of storage over by the back section. And finally, small sun visors with integrated mirrors and lights. Let's now move on to boot space. So firstly, there's a button on the key to release this hatch and a button inside to also release the boot lid. But either way, once you open this up, there's 290 litres of boot capacity, which does make this space big enough for 2 carry-on suitcases. And although this opening does look quite narrow, the boot itself is quite wide. You've also got some tie-down points to keep items secure, a net on the left-hand side, a tyre repair kit for the wheels, as the Supra does not have a spare tyre. And finally, you can quite easily reach things from inside the cabin if you need to get a cable or a water bottle out of your bag. So yes, this isn't the most practical car in the category, but compared to the BMW Z4, the boot space is pretty good. Let's now move on to the powertrain. So under the bonnet features a 3-litre turbocharged inline 6-cylinder, which has been sourced from BMW and internally referred to as the B58. And this develops 285 kilowatts and 500 newton meters of torque. And all this is paired to a 6-speed manual gearbox that sends power to the rear wheels through a limited slip differential. And before we go for a drive, let's talk about the ownership. So you get a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. However, roadside assistance is an additional fee, but if you do keep up to date with your servicing, which is every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, or whichever comes first, Toyota will then extend the powertrain warranty for an additional 2 years. Moving on to the driving impressions. So at the front, there's great forward visibility, good side vision, decent sized wing mirrors, and at the back, visibility is okay, but you do have a blind spot on that C-pillar. Now, starting off with low speed driving, the clutch does take some time getting used to, but it is a wonderful 6-speed gearbox. The ride quality does come across firm, but it's not unbearable. There is good suspension travel through the adaptive shock absorbers, and I've been in this for around 3 hours, and I've got to say, it felt pretty comfortable. So you do have the benefits of this being a European car when it comes to refinement. The seats are also very supportive through the corners, but comfortable at the same time. You do have lumbar support and a good driving position, so it's very easy to get comfortable behind the wheel. Moving on to fuel consumption, Toyota claims on a combined cycle that the GR Supra is able to achieve 8.9 litres per 100. Around the city, you should be seeing figures around 9 to 10 litres depending on how you drive it. But I did drop that down to 7.5 litres on the way to Bathurst, which I thought was pretty good, and that was shifting it all the way to 6th gear. Now, coming down through the corners, the track is narrow, so you don't really have to speed or go above 60, the speed limit, to really enjoy yourself. Now, this 3 litre inline 6-cylinder sounds absolutely incredible, and the steering, you've got plenty of traction with those tyres. It is easy to lose the back if you're not careful, but once you do get a good sense of how the car reacts, especially on a wet road, there is a good sense of what the front wheels are doing. Now, you can swap it between normal and sport, and also configure some of the settings, so you can change the softness of the suspension, the steering input, and the engine performance. The gearbox will automatically downshift if you're not so much of a pro. Now, what sets this apart compared to the standard BMW Z4? Well, of course, you've got the option of a 6-speed manual. It is a hard top, so you do have more agility in the body, and it feels very much like a Z4M from 15 to 20 years ago. So with my driving impressions out of the way, let's now wrap up with a verdict. So then, what is my final verdict on the Toyota GR Supra? Well, in 2025, there are some other rivals to consider, and yes, for a Toyota, around $100,000 is expensive, drive away, but it is refined like a BMW. Well, it is basically a BMW, but this is still a lot cheaper compared to its European rivals. You can get a manual gearbox, and in my opinion, I think the Supra looks the part. But of course, tell me in the comments down below, would you go for this or something else? And if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you in the next film. Thanks for watching.